Todd and I talked yesterday, and in talking about the service, he had some things that he wanted to share. So I'm going to ask him if he would to come at this time, and just let him talk to you as the son of Bob.
I'm going to warn you ahead of time that this may not be pretty, but I promise I'll try to get through it. This morning I got out of the shower, and as I stood in front of the mirror trying to kind of figure out how to get through today, I suddenly had a flashback at some point in my past where Daddy and I, for whatever reason, were staying in a hotel or sharing a bathroom. After he left Oklahoma City, he would come, and even though I lived in town, I would stay at the hotel with him. And we were getting ready that morning, and he brushed his hair, or he combed his hair, and he turned to me and said, "The day your grandfather died, I took this comb off of his bathroom counter, and I've combed my hair with it every day since then, and it gives me a chance every morning to think about your grandpa." So this morning I walked over to his bathroom. That comb was next to his sink with his Old Spice. So I combed my hair with Grandpa's comb and thought about my grandfather and my dad. And I splashed on some Old Spice. I apologize for that. And I just made sure I was ready to come today to tell you guys about my dad. So on behalf of my family, I want to take a few minutes and thank you for coming today to honor the life of Robert Ray Thomas, or Bob Thomas, or Brother Bob, Uncle Bob, Mr. Bob, Cousin Bob, or obviously Daddy. We're thankful that you're here to help us say goodbye. Before this gets too messy and emotionally overwhelming, I want to make sure that I express my gratitude to a few people that are very special to our family. Jim Williams and his wife Angie and their boys. Jim and his wife spent a lot of time with Daddy, and they helped him around the house. They were very good friends to him. They spent a lot of time just visiting with him and being with him. And while those boys aren't technically his nephews, he loved those boys like they're his own blood. They would occasionally stop by and check on him to make sure he was doing okay. And we're very thankful that Jim stopped by to check on him that last time and made sure that we were able to get him to the hospital when he needed to. John McFall and his staff at the Chick-fil-A. If Daddy didn't show up for breakfast, they would call and make sure that he was doing okay. If he was too sick to come down to the Chick-fil-A, they'd bring him his breakfast. And when Daddy was at the VA home, John made sure that he didn't have to eat hospital food every day. And when the family and I came to visit him at the VA, they fed all of us and quite a few of the other guys at the VA that day. That's not the kind of thing that a business owner does for a customer. That's the way you treat your friends. He thought of all of you as his friends, and thank you for being nice to him and taking care of him every day. Alan and Kay Turner. I think Daddy met Alan on his first day back in Kinston. They came to Kinston in 1978. Alan and Kay have been great friends, not just to Daddy, but to our whole family. And I can't really describe to you how much Alan's friendship has meant to Daddy over these years. And Kay was always Daddy's guardian angel when he was in the hospital. She was my eyes and ears on the ground when I couldn't be here. And Kay and Alan have both sat with me and helped me talk through the tough decisions I've had to make in these last few months. I hope you both know how much my Uncle Bill and I truly appreciate you for that, and so much more. Daddy loved you both very much, and thank you for always being by his side. If you've ever received an email or a letter from Daddy, or read any of his writings, you've probably seen one of his favorite sayings. Life is about the journey, not the destination. So as we come here today to pay our last respects, I think we can all agree that he was a good, honest, honorable person. and there's no doubt about what his final destination will be. So I'd rather spend some time today talking about his journey. I've always enjoyed retelling some of Daddy's stories, hoping that somebody else can get as much enjoyment or laughter out of them as I do. Stories from his childhood and adolescent years that are filled with wild tales, like being a 4-year-old stowaway in an ice cream truck and ended up in the next town over. Adventures around the neighborhood with guys that had names like Cooter Hardman and Skidmark Liston that he thought were certainly going to be future residents at the state pen. So I cannot really pass up this opportunity to try to share with you one of his greatest stories. Unfortunately, I've had to do this a couple of times in recent years. My grandmother passed away a little over 2 years ago, and she was my first eulogy. And I lost my mom back in November. And both times, Daddy sent me notes and thoughts and his feelings or opinions about my mom and grandma. And it helped me kind of get a direction and an understanding of what it was that I needed to say. So it only seems appropriate that I turn to him one last time to get some inspiration on what to say here today. So with some help from Daddy's files and his stories, I want to tell you the condensed version of the journey of Robert Ray Thomas. It starts, I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, circa 1943. In the years since then, I've also hung my hat in Oklahoma City, New Orleans, Kinston, and Swansboro, North Carolina, with a few other short stops thrown in for good measure. I've been to about 30 assorted countries over my 70-plus years, and I've seen things that truly amazed me, and in some cases scared the hell out of me. I've met people who were interesting, stupid, funny, entertaining, obnoxious, and some combination of all the above. I've been married twice and divorced twice. Both were beautiful blue-eyed blondes that I loved with all my heart and soul, and I still love to this very day. I've had friends that I would walk through fire for if they needed me to, and I think they would do the same for me. I cherish them all to this day. Some of them are gone now. I look forward to catching up with them when we meet again. Over the years, I've eaten rattlesnake, possum, alligator, raccoon, and chocolate-covered ants, and more than my fair share of the normal stuff, too. I've worn cowboy boots and a Stetson hat and thought I looked damn good. I've flown in a fighter jet, lived on a deserted island, been to the South Pole, the continent, not the pole, and served in the United States Air Force. I've been in fistfights and barroom brawls, and by my account, I've won them all. I've spent time in churches and synagogues and a cathedral or two, as well as some bars and strip joints. I had the appropriate amount of reverence for all, and I learned something in each of them. I even took my mother to a strip club in New Orleans where she spent an hour watching the show, and at the end she leaned over to me and said, "You know, your daddy would have loved this." I've been blessed by the laughter and caress of beautiful women, but also some that were beautiful by bar light but not by the daylight, and some that were just plain ugly in any light but they had a good heart. I've been able to hear some of the world's greatest jazz musicians live and in person. I rode on the Delta Queen during the great steamboat races. I listened to small children play jazz in the French Quarter of New Orleans on a Sunday afternoon while their grandfathers watched on with pride. I participated in rattlesnake roundups in Oklahoma and watched over 2 tons of rattlesnakes be caught and milked for their venom. Some of those got served up with hush puppies, but the rest they released back into the wilds of Oklahoma, which is why I've never been hiking in the hills of Oklahoma. I love photography, and I've taken photos for the Air Force, the National Finals Rodeo, the Oklahoma State Fair, advertising agencies, Sears and Roebuck, and other national catalogs, and even a couple of motorcycle gangs. But my most treasured shots have always been of my son, my niece, and my nephews. I've tried lots of jobs in my time. I was a soda jerk. I worked in a warehouse. I've thrown pottery. I've sold cameras, appliances, bicycles, lawnmowers, chainsaws, spray paint, stereos, fine arts and crafts, and I even sold people as a headhunter. And I've learned important life lessons from each of those. I rode a motorcycle from Oklahoma to New Mexico nonstop, and I've never ridden a motorcycle since. I drove a dragster at 121 miles an hour before it turned end over end 3 times and convinced me that racing wasn't for me. Over the years, I've listened to very wise and smart people tell me profound and intelligent things that I don't even remember now, but I've also listened to illiterate bums tell me dirty jokes that I'll remember for the rest of my life. I often like to reflect and give thanks about the things that I'm grateful for. And most, if not all of them, are things that I've seen. Things like the look on my brother's face when he looked at his young sons. And I never really understood it until the most memorable moment of my life, was just seeing my own son's face a few minutes after he was born. I suddenly understood the expression of joy and pride that I'd often see on my brother. And then I recognized it again on my nephew, when Tim's son Evan and his daughter Maggie were born. And I hope now that he understands the pride and the joy the way that his father and I do. There were other amazing sights and experiences. The sunrise and sunset over a small island in the Pacific Ocean. I've looked down into an active volcano from the open door of an airplane at 10,000 feet. I've flown over the Smoky Mountains and the Rocky Mountains and saw just the tops of the mountains sticking up through the mist. And I've seen just the tips of the Golden Gate Bridge appear to be floating in the clouds. I panicked when we hit a coconut tree while taking off from Christmas Island, and there was a sign to keep close watch on the tree since it was stuck in the wing of our plane. So I had to sit there and watch that wing for 6 hours over the Pacific Ocean as we were trying to get to Hawaii. And then I helped hold the doors open while everybody else threw stuff off the plane to make sure we got to Hawaii. I've seen a herd with thousands of cattle on King Ranch in Texas that stretched beyond the horizon. I've ridden bucking broncos, fed a buffalo from my hand, and milked a cow all on the same day. And then I sat around the campfire and ate barbecue, beans, cornbread, a few 6-packs of beer, and a whole lot of aspirin with some real cowboys. I saw a native woman give birth to twin boys on the sand floor of a hut on Christmas Island, and then 2 days later watched as she was harvesting coconuts with the babies strapped to her back. I cried when I read the names of my former platoon members on the Vietnam Wall Memorial and ran my finger over each name as I apologized for not going with them. Of all my experiences, I think my favorite has been love. I don't think I would have been able to survive this life if I thought for a minute I couldn't love somebody. Because love, any kind of love, is a good thing. But having someone to share your love with is an indescribable feeling. To know that there's another person that you would do anything for, even give your life for, is a feeling that can't be explained to anyone. And that's not because it's a secret. It's because there's not words that exist. I love my son, and I'll never be smart enough to have the words to describe that. I love my brother and his wife, their sons and their families, lots of relatives, 3 beautiful adopted nieces, many close friends, past and present, and I've looked into the faces of all these people that I love and been amazed when they love me right back. Without a doubt, my best memories are watching my son Todd, my nephew Tim, and Kevin grow into good men. They are all kind, generous, honorable, and respectable men. As a father, I've often thought that there should be some profound, earth-shattering knowledge that I should be able to pass on to my nephews, my nieces, and especially my son, to make their lives easier or simpler. And unfortunately, I've not been able to come up with anything that would have much of an impact on their lives, other than the obvious stuff that every parent tries to pass on. Things like be honest, don't steal, study hard, don't date until you're 30. I think that's for Maggie. Wear clean underwear, don't smoke anything, don't drink, stay away from funny-looking old men, never curse out loud, never curse under your breath too loud, never lie, especially if you think you could get caught, and be kind to everyone. But most importantly, never wreck your uncle's car. The point is, my most treasured possessions are my memories, the things I've seen and done. So my advice to my loved ones is to always be aware of where you are and what you're doing. Be sure to see what you're looking at. Remember the faces around you as you live your most memorable moments, because those are faces that will always represent memories from the most cherished times of your life. You know, my daddy loved to tell his stories. I've loved to hear them my entire life. And as technology caught up with him, he started writing them all down. So most of what I've just told you are information from his stories and writings and letters to me and the family. But he wrote something that I disagree with. He said, "I've not been able to come up with anything that would have an impact on their lives." I could not disagree more strongly. He's had more impact on my life than anything else. He taught me by example how to be that kind, generous, honorable, and respectable man that he described. He showed me that unconditional love and affection will make those people that mean the most to you feel special. He showed me how to be a good friend. He taught me that talking to strangers and respecting the people that you encounter in your life will make your life, and hopefully their life, a little bit better. He passed down to me a sense of humor and the joy of making people laugh. And I really think making people laugh was his greatest joy in life. And if the person that was laughing with him was one of his family, it was all the better. He taught me about being self-employed and how to build a reputation as a fair and honest businessman, because that's just as important, if not as important, as how much money you make. But even the things he didn't intentionally pass down are recognizable in the traits of me and my cousins. I can see his polite and soft-spoken manner in my cousin Kevin, his sense of humor and penchant for laughter in my cousin Tim, and Daddy's quick smile and love of all things artistic in Evan and Maggie. I obviously have a healthy dose of his DNA. It's clearly displayed in the receding hairline and the graying beard. And it doesn't seem like there's been a day that I've spent in Kinston where somebody somewhere hasn't stopped me and said, "Would you happen to be related to Bob Thomas?" And they'll usually follow that up with, "I know your daddy," and why they know him and how they love him. And if it happens every day for the rest of my life, I'll never get tired of it. I was at dinner at Ruby Tuesdays night before last, and the guy walked by my table about 3 times, and finally he stopped and looked at me and he said, "Are you related to Bob Thomas?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I saw his truck out front, so I wanted to stop and say hi because I haven't talked to him in a while." When I was a kid, and in the midst of being scolded, my mother would often throw in kind of one of those textbook phrases, "You're just like your father." Right in the middle of screaming and yelling, and I never really understood that. Because if I was in so much trouble, and if I had done something so bad, why would you give me what I thought was the highest compliment possible? Because for me, being like my dad was what I was trying to do. And it turns out pissing off my mother was the fastest way to get there. But other than just the resemblance, he passed on to me so many things. A joy of reading, a seemingly endless supply of useless facts and trivia, a love of working with wood, of taking pictures, and devotion to family and friends. So even if he didn't realize it, he did have an impact on us, and not just me and my cousins, but the people in the world around him. People that he interacted with out in the world came to know him and love him. The staffs at restaurants, gas stations, and dry cleaners all around Kinston all know and love Mr. Bob. And it's not just in Kinston. When he lived in Swansboro, it was the same thing. When we lived in New Orleans, it was the same thing. when I was a kid and we'd pull up to the restaurant in New Orleans, we'd walk in and sit down and the waitress would put the food on the table. I thought that was the greatest thing. You didn't have to look at a menu, you didn't have to do nothing. But as soon as he pulled in the driveway, into the parking lot, they started to prepare his breakfast. When I was trying to write the eulogy for my grandmother, Daddy sent me a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that is just as appropriate today as it was then. To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the difficulties of life, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a little better, whether by a healthy family, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life has breathed easier because you lived. This is the meaning of success. Well, if this is the yardstick by which success is measured, I think we could all agree that Robert Ray Thomas lived an extraordinarily successful life. When Daddy's best friend George passed away about 10 years ago, he wrote a lot about George. And I don't know if he ever shared it with anybody or if it was just his way of dealing with the loss. But he wrote something about George that could just as easily be said about him. So I'm going to plagiarize him one last time. Except I'm going to swap out George for Daddy. I will never have a friend like Daddy again. I consider myself lucky to have known him. We'll all have a place in our hearts where we hold the people who are most precious to us, and Daddy was one of those people. His passing has left a hole in my heart that will never be filled again. There just isn't another like him. I do miss him so. So I don't care what he said. He did have an impact. He left his mark on the world. He left it on me. He left it on my cousins, on all of our family, and his friends. But I'd like to ask you for a favor today, to help me take this last opportunity to make his life lessons have an impact on you and those around you. After you leave here today, always greet your friends and loved ones with a sincere heart, a sympathetic ear, and a warm hug. And every communication with those around you that are special to you with an I love you. Daddy never hung up the phone or clicked the send button on an email before tacking on I love you at the end. And he kept that tradition up to the very end. The last thing he did on this earth was put his hand on my face and mouth the words, "I love you, Tiger." So while we're at it, I'd like you to take a lesson from me too, one that I've just recently learned. Try to make sure that you never find yourself standing where I'm standing now with regrets. Strive to make sure that you don't find yourself standing up here wishing that you'd spent more time with the person laying down there. I've also realized that he taught me one other great thing. He taught me that the first man I ever met was the greatest man I ever met. Thank you for coming today to help me say goodbye to Daddy.